Welcome and good morning, everybody, to another installment of the Experimental Weaving Talk Series. This is a talk series launched out of the Rosa Atlas Institute at CU Boulder, and also the Unstable Design Lab, which is led by Laura Devendorf. This talk series is an opportunity for us to highlight some of the weavers that we love and who are doing really experimental work in the field of weaving, expanding our ideas and our concepts of what can be done inside of weaving, and looking at intersections between art, design, and craft, and then other intersections we haven't even thought of yet, because, intersections is like freeways, right? We're doing it freeways of weaving, right? All the sections. And I will have the leader of the Unstable Design Lab, Laura Devendorf, introduce our speaker this morning. Thank you so much, Laura.
All right, thank you all. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Alyson, for offering to spend your time with us this morning. Again, I'm calling in from my classroom, so I'll do my obligatory, does everyone want to do their wave? Yay! And then there's this other side of the class that's so far away. But yeah, so we're sort of hybrid, in person, not in person. Let me flip this camera back to me. Perfect. Okay. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Alyson Ainsworth today to the Experimental Weaving Talk Series. I'm really excited to see more about Alyson's work today, mostly because it has this amazing quality of taking really, I don't know, it's like weaving I've never seen before. Alyson's really playing with a lot of interesting and unusual materials and playing a lot with different structures and three-dimensional senses, but it always has this amazing aesthetic quality that I always want to reach through the screen and touch. I'm really excited to learn more about it today, and I'm really happy to see everyone in the room. As a way of welcoming Alyson and waking us all up or calming us down at the end of the day, depending on where we're calling from, go ahead and just say hello in the chat. Maybe let us know where you're calling in from. In these kind of remote times, I think it's just a nice way to remind our speaker that there's humans in the world. And without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Alyson. And yeah, really looking forward to this. Just for the chat too, we'll also have a short Q&A at the end of the talk. So you're welcome to just jot questions in the chat as you like. And then Stephen will help moderate the questions at the end of the talk. Okay, Alyson, take it away.
Okay, well, first I just want to say thank you so much for that introduction, Laura, and thank you, Stephen. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation about experimental weaving. It's been really great to listen to everyone else's talk so far. And, thank you for organizing this larger conversation. So I'm excited to talk with everyone about experimental weaving. So let me get my screen. Let's see. So can everyone see? Okay. Just want to make sure all good. So as mentioned, my name is Alyson Ainsworth, and so I'm really both a weaving artist and a weaving designer. I've been working in the textile industry for a little over a decade now, and I specialize in that industry as pretty much as a weaving designer. And I've really had the luck of working for a few different textile design companies that really merge both industrial weaving and hand weaving together as part of their ethos. So in this talk, I kind of want to talk a little bit both about my industrial experience and my professional experience and my personal work, because I think they both kind of fill the space of my sort of weaving experience and my weaving career. So this first image, is a bit of my personal work. But I'll kind of start talking a little bit about my industry experience and what I do professionally currently. So currently I am the master weaver at Chilowich. And as a weaving designer, I work to design fabrics across multiple categories, including residential, hospitality, and commercial or contract markets. And as a weaving designer, it's really my job to consider how a fabric needs to perform, really from the conceptual stages of product development, and to really make sure that the woven designs that I create really aid in the fabric's end use of the product, but also to really create beautiful fabrics that look really nice. So, here are a few examples of some of the fabrics that I've created during my time at Chilowich and some of the products that I've made. Chilowich is mainly known for their woven, most of their products are made of woven vinyl or PVC. If you're not familiar with, PVC or woven vinyl, think of it kind of like a monofilament yarn, something that feels kind of like a plastic. Primarily, Chilowich is known for its tabletop products, so like placemats and table runners. It's likely you have eaten off of one somewhere in a restaurant. I know personally, living in New York City, it's hard for me to go out to eat somewhere and not see them, out in the wild. But in addition to that, we also do a lot of flooring products, so floor mats, wall-to-wall, floor tiles. Also, there's some wall covering in there. We do some window shades, some work in automotive. So it really kind of spans the gamut. All of Chilowich's products are designed in our New York City office. I work on a small team with 3 other designers, and I think what makes Chilowich pretty unique as a textile design company is we do have a Dobby loom in our New York office, and you can see I have a picture of it on the right-hand side. That's a 16 harness Dobby loom, and part of how we use the Dobby loom is really to generate woven prototypes. Kind of at the very beginning stages of development. And kind of the way it's set up in our office is, the Dobby loom really reflects, the setup of our mill partners. So it provides us a really easy way to translate all of the woven development that we create over to sort of the industrial level sampling of our mill partners. So having the Dobby loom in our office provides us a really great hands-on way to develop, all of the designs really quickly and really efficiently. At the very beginning stages, it provides a way to really experiment, on loom very quickly, and we can make multiple iterations of samples to, get ideas down and really test things out very quickly. So it's a great way to really kind of rapidly prototype ideas very quickly before we move on to sort of that industrial mill level stage of sampling, which can take a really long time. So kind of the industrial level of sampling can take up to 6 weeks sometimes to get samples back. So having a loom in studio, you can see things very quickly, and you can, get an idea of what a design looks like, changing scale, changing weaves, changing patterns. So it's, a great hands-on tool for us in the studio. So on the image in the left-hand side, that's just kind of an example of some of the samples that we've done in the past, just some iterations and that type of thing. Chilowich has pretty much 2 main calendar seasons per year. So we'll go through 2 product development stages per year. There's a little bit more in that, but those are our 2 main calendars per year. What's not pictured in this is some of our software that we use. So our Dobby loom uses WeavePoint software. So it's all programmed using and run on WeavePoint. So I use WeavePoint to develop all of our Dobby samples. Our jacquard samples are all done on the computer using Ned graphics. And we'll do some CAD simulations of our jacquard wovens, but primarily those designs are all developed on the computer and sent directly to our mill partners to be woven. So this slide gives you a pretty good example of how close our sampling process can get to the finished stages of the product. So on the right-hand side, this is a product that I designed a few years ago. The fabric's called Rhythm. The right-hand side shows the fabric on loom in the development stages, and the image on the left-hand side shows the final product, the placemats that we made. So, the color's a little bit off. We don't really do a whole lot of color development on the loom. It's really about, finalizing and fine-tuning the elements of the weave, the size of, the different elements and the scales. The scale of how things are working together, but you can see, how close the actual designs actually get, which is really great. Another thing to mention here is kind of just a lot of the limitations that go into industrial weaving. Not only do you have to consider things like float length of your actual weaves and, the actual construction, so how many ends and picks are actually in your weave itself, and things like cost of the fabric and how much yarn is actually in that fabric, how your fabric's going to abrade, and kind of the overall abrasion of, the end product. So those things are all sort of what I have to consider in the beginning stages of developing new weaves. But there's also, an additional level of considering how an industrial loom has to weave these products. So an industrial loom, has to weave hundreds of yards of fabric at a time, and has to maintain, a consistency of fabric throughout. So you have to be really mindful of how your weaves are weaving on these looms. So all of your warp yarns need to maintain even tension and even balance throughout. So you have to be very considerate of what weaves you're combining together and how they're going to weave together. I think a good equivalent on, a hand loom, it would be, if you're, weaving several different structures together. I think of like maybe a block structure, and you might notice, after weaving a little while, your warp tension might become uneven. And, some areas might become a little tighter and some areas might become a little looser. You might have different take-up amounts that sort of start to happen, where your weaves might be tighter in some areas or looser in some areas. And those are things that on hand loom, you can easily fix. You can either make adjustments to your loom, or, you can finish your sample and cut off and retie on. But on an industrial loom, you can't just cut off and retie on. It has to continuously weave. So having those kinds of issues in an industrial loom will cause like a snaking line in your weft yarn or bow and skew, and cause inconsistencies in your fabric. So there's just a lot of things that go into all of these different aspects of designing products for industry, that you really have to be considerate at the beginning. And it can feel like a lot of limitations, in the beginning, but I think it can be a really creative space to design into, with those limitations. But it can often involve a lot of problem solving, which, I really like. I'm very much a problem solver, as a weaver. But I think it just kind of takes like a different aspect of a designer weaver brain, if that makes sense. So, I like to show, my professional work alongside my personal work, to show really a more complete picture of how I think as a weaver and how I approach weaving. I often find myself really at this intersection between weaving designer and weaving artist, and sometimes weaving engineer, throughout all aspects of my work. And I think it's really all those different weaver brains that kind of play into the work that I make. So I really like to think that my personal work really kind of fills in like all of the space and all of the gaps around my professional work. So where Chilowich is very much a performance-based textile, my personal work is created really without any of the constraints of thinking about end product in mind. So one of the questions that I think about a lot in relation to my personal work is, what is a textile? In general, I work a lot with non-traditional weaving materials and, what their interactions are with different weave structures. So I think a lot about, at what point is a textile not a textile anymore? And, does the use of non-traditional textiles or non-traditional materials, create something other than a textile? Or, just because it's woven, does it automatically designate it as a textile still? So, these are some of the questions that come up for me throughout my work and some of the things that I work through during my process. So my work in general is all hand woven. I work primarily on a 24 harness CompuDABI, and a lot of my work involves a lot of hand manipulation on loom. So I move a lot of the yarns around in different ways to create a lot of really unique structures. And that often results in a lot of my work not following a traditional grid structure of a woven textile. And the warp and weft are such an intrinsic part of a woven textile. I'm really interested in what happens when those aspects are manipulated in unexpected ways. So, in contrast to kind of showing the process of, what I go through in my industry experience and at Chilowich, I wanted to talk a little bit about my personal process and some of the processes that I go through to create, some of the work that I do personally. So, so this is kind of a very standard sort of drawing, sketching that I do, in my personal work. And, pretty much I start out with using graph paper. I think I imagine a lot of other weavers can relate to that. But I typically start out just doing a lot of drawing and sketching to really come up with a concept of what I want to create and really hone in on, the finished look of what I want to make. And, once I really finalize all the aspects of the final concept, then I'll start to reverse engineer how to make it. So it's a process of having a really clear image of what I want to make and then figuring out how to make it. So it's very much kind of a reverse of what I do at Chilowich. So where Chilowich is very much, kind of maybe having some concept of what I want to make and then working through multiple iterations of samples to kind of land on sort of a finalized design. My personal work is very much, starting with that, very finalized idea in mind, and then, working backwards to really figure out how to make it, by any means necessary sometimes. So this, you can kind of see some of my drawings in sort of the bottom where I was sketching some of my ideas. And this is very much kind of a stream of consciousness of, aspects of sketching and writing notes. And so I've got some drafts and some threading and, just to kind of get my ideas down and fine tune some aspects. And then this is, what the final piece looked like. And this is a very tiny piece. You can see my hand in there for scale. So, but you can see how the final piece actually resembles some of my drawings. So this is kind of how I work through a lot of my work, just to give you an idea. So I mentioned initially that I work a lot with non-traditional materials. And this is pretty much one of the earlier examples of kind of using non-traditional materials in my work. This is a piece that I created during undergrad, which feels like a very long time ago now. This is a waffle weave structure that was woven with electrical wire and plastic tubing. And you can see in the bottom image, that's an image of the actual process of weaving this piece. And these materials were so rigid in weaving that I wasn't actually able to weave this. The piece wouldn't actually wind around the front beam of my floor loom at the time. So what you're seeing in this image is the piece actually being woven, suspended between two separate looms. So the one side of the warp is tied to the front beam of one loom. It's kind of goes through that loom, is suspended over the floor, and then goes through a reed and the harnesses of a second loom and is tied on to the back of the second loom. So what you're seeing is all of the weaving happening like hovering parallel to the floor. I don't know if it was the most efficient way of weaving this at the time or in general, but it's how I wove it at the time. And at the time I was really interested in these larger materials and how they really exaggerated this waffle weave structure and created this really large scale piece. I know it's really hard to tell scale from zoom, but each of these sort of waffle weave cells is about 3 inches long by 3 inches wide by about 6 inches long. The whole piece is about between like 5 and 6 feet tall. And the whole thing is so rigid and like stiff, it can pretty much hold its shape and stand on its own without any support. It has to lean up against a wall, but it doesn't really need any other support. It's actually standing in my living room right now. But I think reflecting back on this piece in relation to my current work, I'm really interested in how, the rigidity of these materials really contrasts the traditional use of the waffle weave structure. So for anyone not familiar with waffle weave, traditionally it's used in, typically like a towel or blankets or things like that, because the structure itself tends to promote absorbency and warmth. And, this piece being made of wire would obviously do neither of those things. So, it tends to feel very structural and architectural. And, I'm really interested in those contrasts. So, this is kind of where I sort of start to question, at what point is a textile not a textile anymore? It's made of these building materials. It doesn't promote warmth or, absorbency. So I'm just kind of asking those questions, and I think it's just an interesting thing to think about. So more recently, I have been using a lot of paper yarns, and I like these yarns because they still have a decent amount of sort of rigidity to them, but they're a lot more easier to work with than something like a wire, like in the previous slide. But they still do a lot of the same things that I'm interested in terms of scale and things like that. And there's also a lot of room for color development. So these pieces here, a lot of the yarns were individually hand dyed to get really precise color. I was really interested in, the different interactions a lot of these yarns and colors would have in these pieces. So each of these pieces is either a hand-picked lino or a variation on a hand-manipulated wrapping technique, or a little bit of both. And that's really what gives them sort of this lace-like quality. And for anyone not familiar with lino, at its most basic level, it's basically two warp yarns that twist around a weft yarn, and that sort of gives a really structurally sound gauzy weave. And, similar to the previous piece, I'm really interested in sort of the contrast between, the traditional use of these weave structures compared to how these finished pieces look. So, lino is typically a very delicate, gauzy weave that, is sometimes used in like woven meshes or nettings. And I like that these pieces, maintain a lot of structuralness and a lot of architecturalness to them. So, in addition, I was also, really aware in these, the different lines that were being created by the weave structures that I was creating, and how it was really disrupting this like really traditional sort of grid structure. So that was really important for me in these. So after that, I started to move more into like a three-dimensional space with my work. And I'm still kind of using a lot of the same paper yarns. So this piece uses the same paper yarns as the previous one. There's also a thinner paper yarn that's included in this piece. And this one is also all hand dyed as well. And for this piece, kind of similar to how I was talking about my process before, I had a really clear idea from the very beginning of what I wanted this piece to look like. So I actually included, the drawing in the top middle of what I had originally drawn for this piece. And, I really had this idea of, these sort of bands that would sort of come out into space and sort of cross each other and, fall back down and disappear. And as I started to concept this and work through and then, reverse engineer this piece, I came to realize that, my loom as is would not be able to weave this piece. And I started to sort of think about ways in which I could make adjustments to my loom to get it to weave this. So I kind of engineered a system of sorts, and I use system very loosely here, where this entire piece could be woven on loom. So this piece came off entirely as it is off the loom. There's no alteration that happened after the fact. And I think that's a really important aspect of this piece, was just kind of the development process, was kind of the alterations I made on my loom. And I think it's also important that, kind of thinking about, not letting the limitations of my tools sort of prevent me from creating something that I'm interested in making, and always finding a way to sort of work through that in some way or another. So I've also included in the top right-hand corner, that's kind of a flat diagram of this piece, or a cross section. So this is actually a quintuple layer piece technically. So that's five layers. So there's the bottom layer, which is like the ground weave. And then each leg of sort of the X or the crosses, however you want to call them, is each a double weave, which is what's making sort of the dark and light of each side. And then the center X is overlaying one leg each of the other X's. So it's really only the center that's a quintuple weave, but overall it's 5 layers. So that's kind of, and then this was sort of the next iteration in sort of the same themes that I was working with. It's a lot of the same concepts that I was working with through this piece. This piece was also done completely on loom, and I was still really interested in working through sort of three-dimensionality and this concept of sort of twisting and different ways of manipulating on loom. So, but the difference I think in this piece compared to the previous one is I wanted to sort of change which elements became three-dimensional for this piece. So whereas in the previous piece, it was sort of these bands or X's that came out into the three-dimensional space. It's this piece, it's that sort of ground, that thinner layer that sort of becomes the three-dimensional space where the bands become or stay static, but are still maintaining that sort of twisted aspect. And I have a little video. Let's see if it works. Oh, it's not going to work. Okay, well, but you can see a little bit of the scale. The sort of ground weave is three-dimensional on both sides in different directions. So that was kind of important to me for this piece as well. I think overall, this piece and the previous piece are kind of represent what sort of experimental weaving means to me, and how it really influences my work. It's really a questioning, I think, a lot of the fundamentals of what we expect of textile weaving, whether it's through materials or structure or, the dimensionality of a piece, whether it's two-dimensional or three-dimensional. I think my work tends to sit somewhere kind of in this middle ground between, art and design. I think, my work can sometimes suggest a functional textile. I think sometimes because of the structures that I use can feel somewhat familiar, because they sometimes are somewhat traditional structures, but often the materials that I use will usually push these into a more non-functional, more aesthetic space. So that is what I have for you guys. And this last slide just showed that last piece on Loom for anyone who is interested in that, so you can see it on Loom. But does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much. And maybe I'll ask us in the room to clap. And we'll all say thank you. There's definitely some questions in the room. I'm gonna maybe hold off on those for the kind of class session if we can. I want to maybe open up the floor to the audience that's not in the class, just that's here. There's one simple one just about your warping materials, which I also had. But I'm also, just to start the conversation, really amazed that you're able to imagine structures in a way that knows how familiar you are with the materials. So I'm wondering if you could speak more to like, how do you actually, one of the things we do in the class is like, you need to ask your materials what they want to be. What does that process look like for you? And how do you come to know and understand the materials you work with?
I think a lot of it is really just experience. I've been weaving for, 15 years now. So, and I've woven with a lot of unusual materials. And I think it's really just learning your loom and learning your different materials and weaving with a lot of different materials and making a lot of mistakes. And, really understanding what feels like a good structure, what feels like a structural, like something that feels really structurally sound. And I think after a while, it becomes very natural just to kind of know those things. It's hard to explain, I think, but having just been in it for so long, it just is very natural. So
yeah, thank you. I mean, the work is really breathtaking and it's really beautiful, and I still can't wrap my head around how that thing twists, and your explanation of it brought in so much more depth than I had even, when I had looked at your work before. I was like, oh, that's cool, and then it just keeps drawing you in more where you're like So anyway, well done. And it's so like well crafted and well put together. And it really shows your experience and attention to detail. Um, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen. We already have a few questions in the chat. So Stephen, do you mind moderating?
No problem. I have a few. Well, first of all, I have a nuts and bolts question for you. Alyson, are you currently with a gallery? How are you selling your creative work? Or because there's people in the chat like, where can I buy this stuff immediately? Please
Oh,
tell me.
I mean, I am not with a gallery or anything. I sell my work personally. So if anyone's interested, they can email me, but
Okay. Okay,
yeah,
cool. I was thinking the same thing. I'm glad somebody asked, just like asked the
yeah.
question. I was like, oh, that green one, I would really love to live with that. That's really beautiful. And then other going back to kind of related to Laura's questions, and I know material play is so important for you. Can you talk a little bit about the technical aspect of this question comes from Nikita, who's in the class as well. Can you talk about advantages or disadvantages of using rigid materials in the warp? That solution that you had for your undergrad piece was just it's like such an elegant and I want to see almost like a video of you thinking through that process of how you used the second loom to like solve that problem. And I was like, brilliant. But then also you could that solution comes in a room full of looms, right? And so I'm sure working at home, you have to come up with different solutions. So maybe just discussing a little bit about that process of working with a rigid warp and maybe how you like play with different solutions in your studio with that process.
Yeah, I think I think it depends on, what materials you're working with for sure, how rigid they are. I think if it can really come from, if can come from playing with the materials. If it's too stiff, I think for like with that wire material that I was working with that was so stiff and so rigid, I think there are easy solutions to changing your loom setup, if it's becomes a frame loom, or if it, just kind of changing, the way that you're working. I think it really just comes from experimenting and, playing around with your materials and, finding a solution that works right for the materials you're working with. I think it really varies depending on, what type of materials you're working with. I know I've worked with wire a lot, occasionally in other cases too, where it's easier to work flat versus, winding around a beam on, a more traditional loom. But they can be really tight and they can be really hard to pack, so that can be a challenge sometimes as well. And I think it's just finding solutions that work right for each person. So it just kind of depends.
Yes, that's exciting. And I love that somebody with your depth of experience is still like saying to the class, like, experiment, like figure out the like materials, know what you're doing. And that's that's a great answer. And I think thank you so much for sharing that part of your process. A question that we have, and Laura was like, yes, this question. The question comes to us saying that they love all the elements of your weave drafts and your notation and how beautiful it was, but also asking, do you have your own documentation methods? And they said, for example, like the 5-layer cross section that you showed, and then how do you recreate these processes later? Like, what is your sort of drafting? What is your documentation process? Grid paper,
Um,
obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I work a lot on grid paper. I mean, I have a notebook that I do a lot of documenting in. Like I have a gridded notebook that I really like. But otherwise, like I mentioned, I work on a CompuDobby, so I do a lot in Weave Point myself. So a lot of my weave drafts, sit on the computer as well. So, it kind of depends. But yeah, it's kind of a combination of those things for sure. But I don't really do a whole lot of, remaking items. So, so there isn't a whole lot of that.
I thank you so much. I think that's so interesting that it's like, it is that the process of like not remaking things. Is it sort of like, is the play to make the design, because you say you come up with the designs first, right? And then you work
Mhm.
backwards. So is that process so like so important to what the work is, much more than maybe repeating it in that way? Maybe the process is your work for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also comes from I think it also comes from a place of, I do a lot of, sampling professionally. So I think, in my personal work, I very much just want to make my idea and complete it and then just be done with it and then like not go back to it. And, I think it's also a place of, viewing these pieces as, one-offs and, not really wanting to revisit them again necessarily. And, if I have an idea that I want to continue, I will make, other iterations, like in a series potentially, but I think it's more of an exploration or a continuation of ideas than remaking the same idea again.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And going back to this idea of the balance between your commercial work that you're doing professionally and your studio work, compliments from a lot of folks in the chat about both like accomplishing amazing work in both fields. And I would ask you, one of the things that I'm always interested in is like you're working inside of industry, right? You have access to different materials, and then you're playing in your studio. Where do I'm sure you're talking about the two kind of being balanced, and where do they influence each other, and like where does that like commercial exposure, where does that really come into your practice? I think you probably started off with these experimental materials. Is it pushing you further inside of what you're doing in your daily work, or where do you see that play between your I don't know, public, private, or creative and commercial, or how do you're kind of at the crossroads of those things?
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely very much at the crossroads. I mean, I think they definitely, I think play off one another. I mean, I think, I'm very conscious of, kind of keeping them very separate in a lot of ways. Just, I think mentally kind of having the mental space to, design things that are very different from one another, and, create things that are very different, and to kind of, compartmentalize those different sort of aspects of like weaving development and weaver brains, I think.
Mhm.
So, I think there are sometimes moments where, some aspects of my personal work, might influence some of the designs that I might create. But, I think it's very important for me to kind of also keep them very separate at the same time.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's just such a cool balance. I think the way you do it, and you can see the play between the two bodies of work and what you're doing. It's really nice to see when that does bleed a little bit. Laura's class has some questions for you as well, and I don't have those questions, access to those, but Laura does. So I'm going to hand the mic over, Geraldo, Oprah style, to
Wow,
Oprah for the
way
classroom.
to deep cut talk show
I
reference.
mean, none of your students will get it. I'll be like, I don't know, and I'm Trevor
Okay, so then
Noahing.
I'm gonna try to do the camera thing. Is that or not? You can just say your question. Okay, so Dover has a question. I'm gonna let them tell it to me, and then I'll reiterate it to you if you can't hear it. Does that sound all right?
Yes.
Okay, go for it. Oh, okay. So the question about the wire waffle weave, we need to know more about this setup. So the idea is that as you continued the weave, you just kept moving the second loom?
So the space between the looms was basically the length of the final piece.
Okay. Yeah, so it
So
was like a tapestry frame loom on a shaft loom.
kind of, but yeah, because it was threaded through the harnesses of the back loom. So those harnesses did like function, as a regular loom. So it was lifted. There were treadles and it was lifted, like, warps were raised and lowered. And there was, I had, threaded through a reed, which, I brought, back and forth sort of. It was more of like a floating reed that, I use to kind of beat, the weft into place. But yeah, it was kind of a very much like a jerry-rigged sort of loom setup, kind of like a Frankenstein sort of frame, but like floor loom setup, if you will.
Mhm. Nice. It's like to bring out another reference, you MacGyvered it.
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Yeah, follow-up question. So then in terms of keeping tension between the two looms, how did you manage that?
So I actually had a lot of trouble with that. Um, and because so I remember this very vividly. The looms, they were very heavy. They were Maycomber looms, so they were like heavy floor looms. So I thought, they would stay in place, but as I was weaving, the wire was so strong, it actually would pull the looms together. So I had to have a friend of mine, he had to cut some wood slats for me that I had to put in between the looms on the floor to kind of you know brace the looms apart. So
Nice.
yes,
It's good
it
to
was
be friends with a weaver. You get a lot of
yeah,
odd requests.
it was a lot.
Nice. Maybe we'll just do one final question from the audience, and then we'll close up the public portion of this. And then if you're willing to stick around, Allison, there's a few more questions from the
Sure.
class. But I wanted to get to Molly's question,
Thank you. Thank
which,
you.
okay, yeah. So just about whether or not a thing is still a textile. So you were asking that question. And if you could say a little more about what's at stake with that question.
I think it's just really something that I really think about a lot, and because I'm using these other materials that are not traditional, and I think it's because I feel like my work really sort of, I think with all sort of textile art and textile realms in general, they kind of lie in this like weird space of like textiles are, they are relations, our relationship to them is fabric, but then they're art. And then, but mine is like in the space of it's, something other because it's these other materials. And so I think it's just in this weird space sometimes. So that's why I ask myself these questions a lot of, what do these become when they're using these other materials? And I like to think about that a lot. I don't necessarily have the answer to that question. I just like to think about it a lot. So.
Well, thank you so much. I want to, maybe if people in the audience can sort of type their clapping in the chat or unmute and clap. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yay, it's so nice to see everyone's faces. Yeah, we have been recording these and posting these on a YouTube channel where they are captioned and archived. So tell your friends who didn't get up this early or aren't off work yet or are sleeping, depending on what part of the world they're in. We will have our next talk in the series on Wednesday, November 9th by Victoria Manganiello. And yeah, thank you all so much again for joining us. And we hope to see you at the next talk. And thank you so much again, Alyson, for sharing your practice with us. Cool. I'll go ahead and stop this share. And as people are leaving the room, are there any other questions from the class? Yeah, Joshua. Okay. How does the warp twisting happen in the X pieces?
I mean, it's a setup that I kind of sort of put together on my loom. It twists on the loom. I mean, it's kind of hard to sort of explain a whole lot. But but it essentially, like, it twists. I weave it first, and then it twists, and then I kind of push it back. So it's I feel like I can't give like a whole complete answer without like someone here showing it to you, but
I like that element of it, the
yeah.
unexplainable weave structure. I think
Yeah.
it's nice to leave it at that, but it's
Yeah.
done on the loom, and then
It is done on the loom, yeah. So I weave all of the like sort of bands first, and then it's sort of twisted around. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah, Becca.
Question about the lino style,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm saying it right.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there are specific applications in commercial art industry.
Okay.
Because we saw like in the personal work, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I've seen that before in the world, but maybe it's not there.
Yeah, so more questions about, I always said Leno. I guess it's Lino. I guess I was thinking Jay
Yeah.
Leno. I don't know.
Yeah.
But about the gauzy weave structures and where they're used in applications, and maybe also where students can find more information about those weave structures. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think lino, I think is used in a lot of different structures. I think like I think of it a lot is used, like I know it can be used a lot in like some like hand-woven curtain structures. I think lino is one of those interesting weaves where it's really done a lot more in hand-woven structures than it is in like an industrial setting. There are industrial lino looms, which is really fascinating, but it is more of a hand weaving technique. I mean, I know I think there are some lino books, but I don't know of any off the top of my head, but you might be able to search them on Google or on Amazon. But I can't remember. I don't know if I have any, but lino is a really interesting structure. I actually really love lino a lot. It's really I love like you can twist in like different directions, and you can twist multiple kind of warp yarns together to get interesting twisting structures. So I hope I answered your question. I don't know if I got into it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know a whole lot of history about lino structure. I can't say I'm a textile historian, but and I feel like textile history is very murky as it is, with lots of people rewriting it in some ways, but especially with weave structures. But
Yeah, I like murky histories in general.
yeah.
Yeah, Dover, and then Deanna.
Have you ever heard of any of the work by El Ansui?
El Anasuri?